Well, thank you, Dennis, and again, congratulations to the winners. Dennis is getting set up. Next, we're going to have, I think you all know Eric Olson, and I think Jody mentioned how the cooperative effort it was to bring Eric to Michigan State University, and it has certainly been a very wise move on our part, and we're certainly very fortunate to have Eric here, especially being in the kind of the premier, I think, white wheat breeder in the country, probably, because of the limited number of acres. And as I mentioned earlier, Eric is also, known at the national level for his wheat work on the National Wheat Improvement Committee and also the U.S. and Head and Barley Scab initiative. So with that, Eric, welcome.
Thank you for that introduction, Dave. It's good to be here with you all. To actually be in person with you is really great. So Dennis and I and our teams work really hard to get you the data on management practices and deliver the genetics that are going to ensure your profitability. So your profitability for your farms is our first priority when we go to work. And I enjoy going to work every day because wheat breeding is about as close to farming as you can get without all the risk. So I don't know how you manage all that, but we're here to help manage that. And so one of my main message today to you all is that you can manage all of your risk by splitting your varieties. So it's important to consider the genetics that you're putting in the ground. I know you carefully pencil out what's going to cost for all your inputs, your fungicides, your urea, especially in years like this. It is important, well, the wheat's already in the ground, but it's an important decision because that is how you capitalize on all those other investments. Varieties are different. They're all different, as Dave was mentioning previously. So it's a really good setup. So we've come a long way with the genetics at MSU. And so we've got soft red and soft white market classes that we're serving in Michigan. So I want to tell you a little bit about how you can use varieties to maximize your profitability. And so it takes a good team, and we work year-round. I was just rating leaf rust in the greenhouse. We screen over 3,000 plants in the greenhouse for leaf rust resistance every year. Stripe rust is next, so that's the next few weeks. And I know some of these traits, you may not experience these every single year, right? How many people farmed in 2016? 2016. What was the biggest challenge in 2016 that you faced? Probably that stripe rust. If anybody was growing Ambassador in 2016, you had to put out a T2 fungicide to control that, right? You got to have that T3 fungicide every year, but there's resistance. You need to have that in the background every year. So we're always working on it. It takes a good team. We've developed some innovative, with your support, we've developed some innovative breeding methods. We've taken what used to be a 10-year proposition to develop a variety and turned it into 7 years. So we can turn the crank faster than any program in the U.S. And these folks are very happy because it's the last time we've harvested head rows. Too, we mechanize. We try to use the combine for everything. Limit the hand harvest, but we do great work. We've got a great team. It's Amanda Noble, our assistant wheat breeder. So I just want to reflect a bit on last year. There were elements that were challenging. There were some challenges across the board. Our top 8, in terms of production, we're looking at millions of bushels in production this year. We were down 182 million bushels across the country this year, largely because of issues in the top 8. And if you're, I don't know if anyone's from Montana, but they had yields that were way down. The drought, North Dakota, Washington, drought, major challenges in those areas. But I want to show the standouts are our soft red wheat producers. Our soft wheat region did very well. Our production was up this year. I've always wanted to beat Nebraska and Oregon, but not like this under those conditions. But it's a testament to the productivity, and we have great growers in this state. We got good soils and very good growers across the board. So our region did very well, and the average yield kind of reflects that as well. Our compared to the 19 and 20 average, it was higher. For all the challenges that we faced last year in wheat production, just getting the wheat out of the field was an issue. We fared relatively well. There were some bright spots. There were some poor spots, but there were some bright spots around the central part of the state. If you got rain, you were in a pretty good place. But overall, we were down nationally. But again, our region still did very well. And so the developing varieties is a process. It's an ongoing process that we kick off every single year with our crosses. So we're moving hundreds of crosses through this pipeline that we've developed every year, and we get to selection in the field, and we're using genomic predictions. They're doing this extensively in the corn and soybean world, in industry, where you're able to predict the performance of a line before you actually put it in the field. And so even before we put a line in a yield plot, we have an estimate of what the grain yield will be, how it will perform under pressure from fusarium, whether it'll have the quality parameters we want, and how good is it going to be under pre-harvest sprout pressure. So we can make very good predictions, very accurate predictions. And then we send those lines across the state of Michigan, and then we're looking at about 18 locations before they even go into our commercial yield trials. And it's about a 7-year process to get those varieties to the point where we can test them head-to-head with these other commercial varieties. And I want to note that 60% of the wheat varieties that are grown in this country, that's a $9 billion farm gate value last year, 60% of those varieties are developed at public institutions just like Michigan State, okay, North Dakota State, Kansas State, Virginia Tech, all across. There's about 25 different programs that are generating the genetics that are then licensed by seed companies. So most of that work, most of the wheat breeding is done in the public sector. We have great collaborators in the private sector as well. And so of course we test our own material, but we also do commercial testing to support the industry and get the best genetics possible to you growers. That's one of our goals. And so we facilitate testing of genetics in Michigan for a lot of companies across the eastern U.S. Now I was talking earlier about having this disease resistance package. So when you have to make decisions, a T3 or T2 plus T3 or just the T3 fungicide, these diseases can help make that decision. If you have this resistance package, you might be able to punt on that T2 fungicide and still get away with just that T3 application. But these are traits that we need to have in that background every single year. And leaf rust, maybe you haven't had an issue with leaf rust, but we have leaf rust overwintering at the Mason farm right now. There's been leaf rust propagating under the snow down there. That was fall established. It's not a question of whether we're going to have an epidemic. It's going to be there, and we're going to resolve whether or not we have resistance or not. But it pays to have this disease resistance in there, in these varieties. So everything that before it goes into a yield plot, we know what that disease profile is going to be, whether or not you need to put down that fungicide. But we're advancing really the most resistant material, and we're getting a good handle on scab as well. So speed is critical in variety development because these varieties, variety improvement, it's all dictated based on how fast you can get those varieties into the field. And so what you see here is a breeding population, right? In the greenhouse, we have a very talented staff that will inoculate these plants. And hopefully you can see that. These pustules right here, of course you can see those stripes, right? Those don't make it to the field because we're able to cull those out in the greenhouse. So we can just pull the heads right off of those plants. And so the progeny, the offspring from these plants that we produce in the greenhouse will go to the field, and that will become a variety, right? And so none of these susceptibles will make it to the field because we're actively applying selection pressure to where we can move the mean. Like if you see these gray boxes, I know you've seen a lot of tables and data today, so I'm going to try to keep it data light here. But you can see lower disease scores here from very high disease to low disease. Those populations that are undergoing selection have a higher frequency of resistant individuals. And that puts us in a better position to find varieties that have that combination, right? There's not a perfect variety, but we are trying to get it as close to perfect as we can, building in this disease, this foliar disease package, the scab resistance, and then as well as the quality traits. We have a very strong milling and baking industry in Michigan, and all the wheat that's produced, nearly all the wheat that's produced in Michigan is milled into flour and then sold to companies, which will then turn that flour into products. So the entire value chain is present here in Michigan. And so the work that we do on the very front end with the genetics can add value to that whole chain, all the way to the end users. Now, scab is something you don't see every year. And so looking at the yield trial winners seeing 0.2 ppm, that's pretty typical, right? We want to keep it below 2. We like to see some pretty high numbers in our scab nursery. Even though like 2020, we had a dry, hot year last year, very dry year this year, but we still had tremendous disease pressure. And so this is just a nice drone image that Dennis took of our nursery here. We plant these rows of triticale. Ends up being tall. We end up getting triticale that's 6 feet taller or higher. And then we create this, essentially it's a microclimate, a humid microclimate where we propagate that disease. And so as we speak, we're growing hundreds of pounds of infected corn that we pile on this nursery every year to get heavy disease pressure. So it's not uncommon to see ppm up around 120 for some of these varieties. We're pushing the theoretical limits, right, of what we can actually get these varieties to do. But we're able to make we're able to make selections in advance. On the right here, you can see a resistant variety, and you see those bleached heads on the left. Those don't even make it into the yield testing program, so they would never make it into a company's lineup and would never make it into your field. So we're working to keep those vulnerabilities out of the varieties that we have. And so we can apply very good selection to control scab. I think we've made a lot of progress on scab, particularly with genomic selection, the predictive breeding that we're doing now. We have tremendous prediction accuracy. So we can see DON levels up to 120 in that nursery. But this is a cohort of lines, advanced, using genomic selection, predictive breeding. We're able to predict how those lines are going to perform, and then we actually evaluate them, put them in the proving grounds, and they match up to expectations, essentially. Versus previous, where it's you really have to focus to get those individuals down in this range. So we are removing these vulnerabilities from the varieties that are moving through our program now. And this I'll show you some actual values towards the end of the talk here. Now, I mentioned the take-home message here will be if you have the capacity, plant multiple varieties on your farm. Spread your risk. If you're going to buy stock, you wouldn't buy stock in just one company, right? You wouldn't put it all in Meta, right? Because you've probably heard, you would spread your risk around. You could, by planting multiple varieties, you can complement the risk factors present in one variety. You can complement the weaknesses in one variety with the strengths of another variety. If you want to plant that racehorse, get that high yield potential, balance it with something with scab resistance. In this example, I want to bring up maturity. Wheat varieties will flower up potentially with a 5-day difference. We saw about a 3-day range from the earliest to the latest material in our commercial variety trials this year. But you can have a broader spread. That affects management, right? So if you have 2 varieties, one on the early end, and you have your later variety, and you have a rain event, if you can't get your fungicide, you can't get that T3 fungicide on that early variety, and you get hit with scab. But you were able to get out there and protect that later variety, you've just saved half of your production, right? Or whatever percentage that you've put into this later maturity variety. This is an example of spreading your risk. It also spreads the work out, right? Would you rather run 1,000 acres? And I'm not familiar with the logistics, but it seems to me I would much rather split 1,000 acres up into a 2-day event versus trying to run multiple sprayers on a single day. You can spread your logistics out, right? With the maturities, early versus late. You're spreading that risk around. Now, this was something very painful to see. The PreHarvest Sprouting issue this year is a challenge, and it's a difficult trait to work on. The folks in the Pacific Northwest have been grinding on this for a very long time. It's a challenge to make progress, but we're pushing every single year. So with support from you all, we are able to collect data. Even soft red wheat, there is a modest vulnerability. Obviously, if it gets rained on for 5 to 7 days, there's not much you can do at that point. But for those nuisance types of rains, single day event, 2-day event, we do have some resistance that is showing up in our genetics now. So we're able to make progress because we can phenotype that trait. We can get good data on this. So we have Amelia Orr has been, and previously it was grad student Melissa Winchester that was working on this, where we sample right at physiological maturity. We apply misting conditions. So we create just like with scab, we're creating a worst case scenario for these varieties. But what you can see here in these data, here's Jupiter, here's a typical soft white wheat They won't look that bad. You won't see that in your grain carts at all. This is worst case scenario. But something like you can see just numerically, Jupiter, our ambassador, even Dynagrow 9242 has some better tolerance. It doesn't go, the falling number doesn't go as low. There's a lot of reasons for that. But what I'm saying is that we're getting to a point where we have, this is about the best we can get with soft white winter wheat, and we're there. These are new entries in the commercial yield trial in Michigan. This is our first look at these lines that were passed through the program on using the methods I had just described. Got this little asterisk by these too. These all have the FHB1 gene. These have a large effect scab resistance gene. So what we have, this is why I'm thrilled, what we have now is we are closer than we've ever been to having scab resistance and pre-harvest sprout resistance in our soft white winter wheat germplasm. And I'm not neglecting reds. 60% of our crosses reflect our acreage, right? 60%, 60-40, roughly, in our crossing program. But our white wheats, we're in a really good place. We're getting FHB1 from this New York material. And W190, I'll talk about that one a little bit. That should be in the marketplace this coming year. There should be quite a bit of seed available for that line too. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Another line of reasoning to plant multiple varieties is the performance, the year-to-year performance. These varieties, there is variability in how a variety will perform year to year. And you can see that in the trial data. So what we see here, this red, these are percentages. This was at the 28th percentile in 2019. So Sci 547, looking across 3 years here, versus RUP 902. These are just varieties that clearly demonstrated that genotype by year variation, the year-to-year variation. So that variety, just because it performed well last year, 2020 was a very different year from 2021, right? Those high temperature spikes in 2020, there was those varieties that could tolerate that heat were favored in that environment versus drought. Those are two different stresses, right? Sometimes they're at the same time, but the varieties are responding differently. Something at the 28th percentile versus RUP 902 at the 98th percentile. Well, 1 year change, we saw Sci 547 is at the 95th percentile now. 902 dropped to the 47th percentile. The best variety in 1 year is not always going to be the best variety the following year. It's better to plant both of those varieties. Now, the tragedy is you don't know exactly what varieties, how it's going to perform the following year, right? So you're spreading your risk and you're protecting yourself from the low end. By planting multiple varieties, you don't expose yourself to the risk of having a variety that's only at the 55th percentile across these years. You lock yourself in at that point at the 63rd percentile, right? So you're protecting yourself from the bottom side risk here by planting multiple varieties. Unfortunately, we don't always know what the upside is. We don't always know that variety that's going to perform at the 70 to 90th percentile every single year. So we have to spread our risk across years. And it's not peculiar just to soft red wheat. We have the white wheat as well, right? Dynagrow 9242. Jeff showed that it can be Jeff Crone just showed that it can be a very high yielding line. But in the variety trial, it performed only at the 19th percentile versus Jupiter was up at the top of the trial in 2021, was only at the 35th percentile in 2020. What I'm saying is these varieties, their performance can fluctuate year to year. And so if you can combine, you're buffered against these year-to-year fluctuations by planting multiple varieties on your farm. Now, I understand the logistics of that. If you don't have the seed handling equipment, it's not feasible for everyone, right? We have a great network of certified seed growers in this state where we do have access to very high quality certified seed in the state of Michigan. Now, if you do go with one variety, make sure you have multiple years of data on that, and make sure that you do have a variety that is stable. So, we talk about yield potential is important, right? We want to be able to get the most out of a variety, but yield stability is just as important. To protect yourself from the downside, from the bottom side risk in this scenario. So, multiple varieties, planting multiple varieties on in your operation has a lot of benefits. So the best place to go for that information is this publication that's put out. from MSU and support from Michigan Wheat Program every year. So good data. I encourage you to check that out. It's usually out by in the August Michigan Farm News, and you can go to the web anytime to check that out. So what have I been up to for the past few years? Well, we've been developing some varieties here, and I think one that you might be familiar with that's been in production is Whitetail. That was released in 2017. We had the first year of certified seed production was in 2019. I believe it was on about 20% of the acres in Thumb in our white wheat counties. 30,000 acres in 2021. Very high yielding variety. It's the second highest yielding variety. Well, it has the highest 3-year grain yield of any of the soft white wheats in Michigan. So we're talking about yield similar to like that Cy 100, right? And Cy 100 is a rarity. I mean, that was the highest yielding line in the Ohio performance trials. It was like somewhere in the top 10 in Kentucky. But we have lines like Whitetail that are performing very, very well. We have Harbor that was out next. That's a soft red wheat. Good foliar disease package there. And Moonlight, it's got some of that yield stability that I was talking about. And you know, we know that wheat is dual purpose. So Moonlight's got very bright straw, very good straw producer. And what I want to highlight here, you might have seen W190 in the pedigrees that I was just showing. It's not the highest yielding line, but it is the most scab resistant line. This line is the best insurance policy for Fusarium head blight in our soft white winter wheat. It's got a large effect FHB1 gene, but there are other minor effect genes that are contributing to the scab resistance. And then R357 is a recent release. That's got the highest 2-year grain yield of any of the soft red wheats that have been tested in Michigan. And so we're competitive with lines from AgriPro, Syngenta. And so that'll be a really, really good line for folks that are pushing yield potential. Really good short stature line. And I encourage you all to, you know, we'll have our summer meeting. We'll be together again in the summer, and I encourage you all to check out the variety trials. Actually interact with those varieties and walk the plots, just to get an impression of the diversity in the genetics that we have, and you can actually decide for yourself what are those traits that you're interested in. You know, what does a good line look like to you? And of course, yield potential and stability are part of that. Broad adaptation is something that not all varieties have, but some of these varieties like R906, and these are experimental numbers at this point. They'll get a number with the company or a different name, of course, as they get into the marketplace. But 906 has really good broad adaptation. Now, R898, we do have a lot of lines with this FHB1 gene, and we've been pushing it because it does have a large effect on scab resistance. And you know, I've come to appreciate the dual purpose nature of wheat, and 898 is one of the taller lines. It doesn't lodge. We had great lodging pressure a couple years ago in Saginaw, at our Saginaw County. Excuse me, no, it was Sanilac County site where we had tremendous lodging pressure, but 898 was standing tall through it all. So these taller varieties, of course, put on a lot of biomass. That's productivity, that's straw, right? That's a good straw producer. And you need that scab resistance. If that straw is destined for a TMR, if you're using that to modify a ration in any way, you have to have scab resistance in there. You know, we think about the grain, you know, because that's sold, right? And there's a metric and a dockage associated with that. But but you have to consider scab resistance if you're feeding that straw, if it's going into a ration in some form. Now we have some lines like R720 that have very specific adaptations. So that's more of a Gratiot, Isabella, Western Saginaw kind of a variety. And of course, we're always appreciating the straw and scab resistance and stripe rust resistance as well. And these are some of the lines. I really wanted to show you this column right here. And I know this has been a data-intensive day, but I just want to show you the contrast in the lines that are coming out of the MSU program in terms for scab resistance, for DON, ppm. Now, I know C16 ppm sounds really bad, but the worst, you know, Cy 100, that'll push 45, right? And so we are seeing our lines coming in, you know, R74, you know, that was bred for scab resistance, right? So you can see what a resistant line will look like. We have, all of our genetics are below what you would call an industry standard scab resistant line, or low DON. And all of this was achieved with a combination of those genomic predictions, trying to predict what the performance will be. And when I say that, we genotype everything. If you guys have done the Ancestry.com gig where you send them a sample and then that's essentially the same type of technology that we're using in our wheat breeding program. So you can actually predict like a risk score for cancer or for other health-related issues. We use some of the same statistical tools, the same techniques to predict traits like resistance to scab in our program. And of course, we've been bringing along some leaf rust resistance. A lot of our resistance is coming from the Virginia Tech program. We've got Hilliard, and this is a Hilliard sib right there. So it's the best crosses I've found have been for our soft white wheat, our Jupiter Ambassador related material crossed to Virginia Tech material. They're very, very different genetics. You get a really good pop, good lines out of that. And our yield is competitive as well, right? Looking at soft white wheat, we've got a couple lines here. They've got FHB1 in the background with the asterisk there, and our Don levels are quite low. You can see some of our typical, all right, so there's there's Ambassador up around 74 ppm. It's a challenge, right? How high can we push it? And wheat breeding is kind of a sport as well. We're always trying to win the trial and trying to push the numbers as far as we can. But you can see we are getting a pretty good disease package, and those Don numbers are quite low, especially in our white wheat. So we're continuing to move along some really good material, and I want to thank you all for your support for our program. And we have a great industry, a great wheat industry, a great value chain in Michigan here. I want to acknowledge Dennis and Amanda, Sam, Jordan, Amelia, Libby, and John are our two graduate students, and we had a good cohort of students that graduated. Tommy's working in western Kansas with Corteva. And anyway, we have a great team. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments. Yes, sir. Test weight is pretty stable. The question was, what about test weight? And it is challenging to maintain because, especially when you're pushing yields really high, and I don't know if you caught that, there were some test weights that were around 60. Dave had a 60.3 test weight. That was pretty outstanding. But you do see in some of those higher yielding lines, the Sci 100 does this across all the trials. If you look at Kentucky, Ohio, and Michigan variety trials, the test weight is always below 60. And so when you have some of those racehorse varieties, they very high yielding, it's a challenge to keep that test weight on par with the high yields. But there are some varieties that are consistent. I don't know if anybody's grown Starburst or Sunburst, the Star Twins. They hold their test weight very well. They have very high yield potential. W190, that white wheat that I had showed there, very stable test weight. It's still high yielding, stable yield, but the test weight is stable. So you do see that. It's kind of the Achilles heel of some of these racehorse varieties, higher yielding varieties, where they might slip a little on their test weight as you start to push them to their limits. That's a very good point. Yes, sir? The names, I'm not much of an artist in that regard, so I leave that up to the companies to come up with those. Our 898 means it was just plot number 898, and it's a red wheat, so that's about the breadth of my creativity there. I've taken recommendations. Yes, sir? Okay, certified seed. Well, so there's a couple stages. So we do our yield testing just with seed that's run through the combine. It's not pure. But we have purification that takes place in tandem or in parallel with our yield testing program. And so we're trying to grow. It goes from breeder seed stock, that pure line stock that we have in our program, that goes to a foundation grow that's usually done by a commercialization partner. But we're working to produce larger breeder seed stocks. It takes time. Because we can cut 3 years off on the front end, but we still need 3 years on the back end to get enough seed to plant on 30,000 acres. So we can go from just under about 2 acres at the breeding program level to, I believe it's about 100-acre foundation seed grow. And this is the maximum. Then you go to about, once you get to about a 4,000-acre certified grow, you can go 150,000 acres then. But it takes a bit of time to takes those 3 years to go foundation. Then the first year of certified seed, there's some seed, but not a lot of seed, right? It'll sell out in the first year, but then by that second year, if the variety's good and there's enough demand, there's usually a significant amount of certified seed produced in that second year then. So there's a couple of different stages. It's one thing to get to know that we have a good variety, and then we wait. It's just a matter of, it's just scaling up the seed then in the latter part. So, sorry, yes sir.
You talk about the test weight, but if the wheat is fully mature and like all of that, does the test weight really make any difference in the milling quality and all that, or is that just a way for them to rob us?
Well, I wouldn't say though, it does. I would have to defer to my colleagues like Todd with Knappen on the actual how that affects the milling properties. But it does affect the quality of that grain and how good of a product can be made with that. Just like with pre-harvest sprouting, it affects the products that can be made from it. So, and it also affects the marketability too. So it's test weight can go down. It does go down if that wheat is in the field. We saw it in our trials where we had to wait and wait and wait, and so test weight is ticking, at that point. So it's a challenge. Now, as to this, how it specifically affects quality, I won't go that far. I'll stay in my lane on that one. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the other question for you was, ties into the test weight and the falling number. This year we had some rather unusual amount of rain at harvest, and the milling companies weren't sure they wanted the grain because the falling number had dropped so much. The ones with high test weight seemed to be okay. The ones that fell to 54, they weren't sure they wanted it at all until they started figuring out how they could blend it.
Right. So you can blend with test weight. That's possible. Now the hesitancy to blend with sprouted wheat it relates to the amount. It takes just a little bit of sprouted wheat to spoil the whole batch. It's not like with Don, right? They probably just got rid of all the Don from 2015, probably just a few months ago, right? Because you can blend it out. You can dilute it out 1-to-1 to get it below that 2 ppm threshold. But when you have that amylase enzyme in there that causes that low falling number, it spikes the whole batch, and so it's harder to get rid of it. So that's why there's a little bit more. They're more careful with sprouted wheat. That's right. Yes. We can build in genetics that will tolerate a modest amount. Now I'm not saying that if anything's going to sprout if it rains for a week. I know we're not supposed to talk about it, but if you were combining soybeans in 2018, you might have found sprouted soybeans, right? Any seed given enough moisture and time and temperature will sprout, but we can build in genetics to tolerate those some variability in rain and duration. You can build it in with genetics so they don't sprout, but it's complex genetics, but we can make progress. We have made progress on it, but it takes a couple years to get those varieties into certified seed production and so on. I wish we had a magic bullet for these, but it takes time. And I want to say that MSU has had a wheat breeding program for over 60 years, and I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants right now, and on the shoulders of my colleagues with the germplasm that we use, the parents that we bring into the program. So there's still a massive effort on all of that. So I feel like we've made some good progress in the past few years, and we'll continue to make progress on these traits.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Certainly
I appreciate
a
it.
great
Thank you very much.
presentation. As they're changing the mic around here, we would appreciate your feedback. I know other years we've had people make comments on how we can improve this event, and certainly if you have any questions or suggestions about things we can do better or did wrong, please let myself or any other board members or Jody or staff around here know what some of your ideas or problems or questions you might have about running the organization like this. Dennis is working on getting the, he's getting his mic back. That's what he's doing. Eric wanted to take that home, I guess. That would have been a surprise. Oh, okay. Well, you need that too. So here to wrap up with RUP and CCA credits, Dennis.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for a great day here. I got just a few reminders before we take off. And Jody, where are you in the back? Stand up here. Dave said something this morning about all the hard work that she puts in for this organization, but I need to second that because without her, this meeting would not happen, as well as all the other events that go on. And I have the opportunity to work with her quite regular, and there's nobody that works harder than what Jody does. So let's give her one great big round. All right, so we are about to wrap up here. CCA credits, those of you that want CCA, out on the registration table, there's the QR code and the sign-in sheet. You can either sign in or scan the QR code to get your CCA credits, so make sure you do that on your way out. RUP credits are different now. Since we got into the pandemic, we no longer are doing bubble sheets. So bubble sheets is how we used to verify that we're getting all the information. You had to fill it out and send it or give it to us at the end of the meeting. Now we collected that data from you in the registration. So we printed those off and have them on that back table. So if you haven't had a chance to go back there and verify that you have the right information on there for your credits, do that before you leave, because otherwise if you don't and you leave here, you're not going to get the credits if you're not on that sheet and signed up. So if you have any questions, let Jody or me know. I got the seminar code written up on the screen. If you write that down for your records and track that stuff, go ahead, and that's the code for today. We did get approved to apply these credits to private, commercial core, or category 1A, and it is 8 credits. I wanted to remind you, there was a slide rotating earlier. The field day will be June 16th at the Saginaw Valley Research and Extension Center. So hold that date on your calendar. We'll have more information on that to register and whatnot coming later. And then today is the last day to sign up for Yen. If you want to sign up, see me or Jody, or sign up on the sheet outside. There's one that says Yen sign up on the registration table there. So Dave?
Thank you, Dennis. You just heard Dennis talk about all the work Jody does. I think we have to mention all the work that Dennis does. I don't know anybody more dedicated to the job. I think he doesn't know how to say no. We live, 3.5, 4 hours away from Dennis's place, and he's been up in our area and left our place at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, headed home. He's been up in our area at 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. He's certainly been a great asset to the wheat growers in this state. So how about a round of applause for Dennis? That concludes our event today. Certainly appreciate all your attendance. Great questions, great conversations. Certainly hope you have a safe, productive new year.